we've had successive governments of different party colours, they've ultimately used immigration as a way to mask over that worklessness crisis. And I think there's almost been a sort of political addiction to cheap foreign labour. And I think that we really need to have a major reset in terms of how we view immigration, but also how do we boost the skills and how do we ultimately improve the sort of skills quality within our domestic workforce in the UK.
Immigration is coming up once again. Keir Starmer has asked Sir Jim Ratcliffe, one of the country's richest men and the owner of Manchester United, to apologise for saying the UK has been colonised by immigrants. Starmer says Britain is a proud, tolerant and diverse country, but the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage wrote on X,
"Britain has undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many areas in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but Reform won't."
Well, let's hear those comments from Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He was speaking to Sky News about the state of the economy.
At the moment, I don't think the economy is in a good... You can't afford... you can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause...
It's been colonised?
It'll cause... Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a kind of a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in.
Times Radio's regular business correspondent Dominic O'Connell knows Jim Ratcliffe well. He's written a book about him and interviewed him many, many times. He sent us this message.
I've interviewed Jim Ratcliffe many times in the past, most recently, of course, for the Times Business podcast, and he's always been quite vocal on domestic issues, whether it's policing, education, energy policy, the wider handling of the economy. But he's never talked about immigration before, and I suspect the shrieking you can dimly hear in the background as his PR mind is wondering why he went there. There is a bit of a tangled history to this. He left the UK for the first time in 2008 to become a tax exile. When Ineos got into trouble during the credit crisis, the government was handing billions to the banks. He went to the government and asked for a VAT holiday, not a VAT, not to pay it, but just to have it deferred for a bit. And the government said no, and he took offence and in the end left to save money. The business secretary who said no was, of course, Peter Mandelson. Does he really think, as the comments have been interpreted, does he really think that the UK has been overrun by immigrants? I think if you asked most mid-70s-year-old men from Manchester or Hull, where he was also brought up, what they think about immigration, 9 out of 10 of them would say exactly the same thing. And that's who Jim Ratcliffe is.
Well, that's Dominic O'Connell, who knows Sir Jim Ratcliffe really well. And that's, I suppose, the personal reflection and a bit of the context about his background and why he might feel the need to make those remarks, or why he might feel those remarks actually quite strongly. You also heard from the man himself. And we've dealt with some of the political reaction this morning too. Rakib Ehsan is a researcher in demography and integration and joins us now to go through some of the facts relating to this story. Good morning.
Okay, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Some of the numbers that Jim Ratcliffe quoted in his interview are obviously wrong regarding the population. So what is the true perspective?
So in the interview, Jim Ratcliffe said that in 2020, he said that the population of the UK was 58 million, and now he said that the population was 70 million. So he's suggesting that it's increased by 12 million people during that period. That's a gross exaggeration. If you take the mid-2020 figure, it's 66.7 million. And if you look at the mid-2025 estimate, I believe it was 69.4 million. But saying that, if you look at them from June 2021 to June 2025, the UK has received in the region of 4.83 million migrants in the form of long-term international migration. So you can say in that period after there was that sort of post-Brexit liberalisation of visa rules under the former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson, we have experienced unprecedented levels of immigration. I think there's some perfectly legitimate concerns in terms of the scale of immigration, the pace of social change in certain communities, and the problems that may pose from an integration and social cohesion perspective without using terms such as colonization and invasion. And when you refer to population figures, I think it's very important to be accurate in order for us to have a truly informed debate.
And that, as you set out there, that there is a very legitimate concern about the pace of change in some communities, which is talking about integration, really. Why have successive governments failed to deal with this as an issue?
Well, I think that integration in some ways has become a non-policy issue in our politics, and I think that that's been a serious problem. I think there's also the reality is that we have various political parties where they just lack the intellectual depth to even have those robust and important conversations on integration. I think that the Prime Minister's response to Ratcliffe's comments were quite interesting. He referred to us as sort of an open, diverse and tolerant country, but not truly engaging with what he said, engaging with people's concerns over mass immigration in recent times. I find it very interesting as well. The Prime Minister recently, he delivered that Island of Strangers speech, was very much centred on immigration. I think referring to as almost some kind of open borders experiment under the previous Conservative government. So I think that the fact that we have the Prime Minister, it comes across as quite inconsistent when it comes to those issues of immigration and integration. That's not very helpful either.
When you study this, you're a researcher in this area. What could political parties suggest? Is there anything political parties could suggest that would help to ease the country's concerns about integration and help make some of those communities a bit more diverse?
Well, I think that time and again, Kate, we've had elections. We had the June 2016 referendum on EU membership. I think that for some time that there's been a long-standing mainstream desire to get a better grip of immigration, to reduce immigration numbers. But I think along with numbers, also taking into account the quality of migration, taking into account issues of cultural compatibility, allowing migrants the best chance to integrate. And I think that in recent times as well, I think that there was part of Ratcliffe's interview where he did talk about many people being on benefits. I do think that we do have a worklessness crisis in the UK, especially among younger British citizens. And I think that we have a lack of a genuinely active industrial strategy in terms of boosting skills, apprenticeships, scholarships, helping people develop their skills. And that's not just with younger people, but also in terms of lifelong learning. And I think that, unfortunately, I think that we've had successive governments of different party colours. They've ultimately used immigration as a way to mask over that worklessness crisis. And I think there's almost been a sort of political addiction to cheap foreign labour. And I think that we really need to have a major reset in terms of how we view immigration, but also how do we boost the skills and how do we ultimately improve the sort of skills quality within our domestic workforce in the UK.
Can I ask you finally, Rakib, and it's a question, I suppose, more about emotion. It's about culture. How do we go about, if what we're talking about here is developing a sense of our own culture and asking people to sign up for that or become part of that or sort of join that, how do we go about asserting that? Because we've seen over recent months people putting up flags, for example, and that is an expression of, I want my culture to feel like it is dominant in this area. It's a response to something that people feel very strongly, but it may not necessarily help encourage other people to think of that flag as their own. What can be done to develop that sense of culture in a way that actually works?
Well, I think that for some time we've had this state-sponsored model of multiculturalism, and I say this as someone who's of Bangladeshi Muslim origin. I think that the UK's done, quite well when it comes to celebrating and promoting minority cultures and religions under that model of multiculturalism. But I almost think it's been an asymmetrical multiculturalism then, where you have people, if you call it the indigenous population, people who identify as white British, when they express any sense of pride in their sort of maybe traditional English culture, they feel that that's gone underappreciated, or almost to the point that they've been vilified for doing so. So I think that what we need to do moving forwards is that we need to acknowledge and at least recognise that people do have legitimate anxieties and concerns when it comes to cultural and demographic change, because I think that would be a positive step in the right direction. And I think that if we have this sort of model of multiculturalism where we appreciate a variety of cultures. That should include also the culture, the traditions and heritages of what you would consider to be the established native population.
Well, it's something that a lot of our listeners agree with you on, Rakib, and have been really messaging in and talking about this morning. So it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Rakib Ehsan there, a researcher in demography and integration.
And that's so interesting what he said there, because I think Britain has always been a magpie culture. We've always grown and been shaped by others, but that also means that has then created British national identity, which is then epitomised in a flag. And at some point, you've got to accept what that is and celebrate it and not be shy about it and be worried about accused of being racist. I think we should be opposed to monocultures living within our country. I think that's the way we should think about it, that if you have people living in a part of the country who don't speak the language, who don't share the same approach to important issues like marriage or women or something like that, that is not acceptable. So you have to be able to legislate to stop monocultures existing within the broader culture. But you've got to do it in a way that isn't racist and doesn't cause community lack of cohesion. And it's very difficult, but you've got to be honest about that. If that's the problem, we don't want monocultures existing in our main culture, then that's what you've got to tackle shortly.